In Chicago and its suburbs are important buildings designed nearly a century ago by three of the founders of modern architecture in America. Henry Hobson Richardson, designer of Glessner House. Louis Henry Sullivan, designer of Carson Pirie Scott. And Frank Lloyd Wright, designer of Robie House. Boston architect Henry Hobson Richardson was one of the finest architects in the East and was nationally known for his Trinity Church in Boston. He was invited to Chicago in 1885 to design a wholesale store for Chicago merchant Marshall Field. This fine building, a model for both Sullivan and Wright, was unfortunately demolished in 1930. Richardson's remaining monument in Chicago is the Glessner House at 18th and Prairie on Chicago's South Side, completed in 1887. Is a favorite kind of Richardsonian entrance. The rooms of Glessner are ingeniously arranged around a spacious courtyard, giving much desired privacy. Preserved by the Chicago Architecture Foundation and largely restored. This view is of the master bedroom, the library, with its beamed ceiling, simple fireplace, and Chicago's greatest architect was Louis Sullivan, who trained at the School of Fine Arts in Paris. With his partner, Dankmar Adler, he designed the Auditorium Building, a masterpiece of design and engineering, completed in 1889, incorporating a theater, a hotel, and business offices. Rather fortress-like on the exterior, it owes a large debt to Richardson's Marshall Field building in the window arrangement. Massive corbelled piers between the entrance doors support the balcony beams. The doors on Michigan Avenue are other examples of Sullivan's fondness for the Romanesque. Rising 17 stories above the building is the tower, where Adler and Sullivan had their offices. Building the tower so that it would settle evenly with the rest of the building was one of Adler's greatest engineering feats. 3 arches on Congress Parkway lead to the entrances to the lobby, within which more arches support the upper floor. An ornamental stairway leads to the theater, where we find the pièce de résistance, the pearl inside the shell. A splendid combination of Adler's engineering and Sullivan's architecture, aesthetically satisfying with remarkably fine acoustics. While working on the auditorium, Sullivan was commissioned to design 2 tombs for Graceland Cemetery on North Clark Street. The first was for Martin Ryerson, with a somewhat Egyptian feeling, and a better-known one for Carrie Eliza Getty. The Getty tomb is a simple cube, rich in delicate decoration. The Romanesque entrance arch echoes the window lunettes. The outer gate of pierced bronze is one of Sullivan's more felicitous ornaments. Near the Ryerson tomb is a modest monument to Sullivan, erected and paid for by his friends. For the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, Adler and Sullivan were asked to design the Transportation Building, a long structure with a double row of Roman arches. An outstanding feature of the building was the Golden Door, framed by 5 concentric arches elaborately gilded and painted. In the same year, Adler and Sullivan built the Chicago Stock Exchange. When the building was demolished in 1972, the entrance arch was saved and now stands on the east side of the Art Institute. Also saved when the building was destroyed was the magnificent trading room, now restored and refurbished and built into the east wing of the Art Institute. Some of Sullivan's most intricate designs were preserved here. Of a slow economy, the partnership of Adler and Sullivan was dissolved in 1895. The first major building on Sullivan's own was the Carson Peary Scott store, commissioned originally by the firm of Schlesinger and Meyer. Carson's is an outstanding example of a steel frame building. State and Madison is known to architects throughout the world for the elegant ornamentation of Carson's corner entrance. Designed by George Elmsley from sketches by Sullivan, it was casting by Christian Schneider. The windows of Carson's are per Chicago window, with a large fixed pane in the center and narrow casement windows on each side. While Carson's was being built, Sullivan was designing Holy Trinity Orthodox Cathedral on North Levitt. Holy Trinity is a compact building with Russian and Byzantine overtones. Somewhat eclectic, the tower still has a certain charm. The chief exterior ornamentation is the cut-out wood design over the entrance. The large arches of the interior make the space appear greater than it is, and the general effect is one of jewel-like delicacy. Sullivan's last commission in 1922 was for the facade of the Krause Music Store on North Lincoln. Working at the same time as Sullivan were other members of the Chicago School, Daniel Burnham and John Root, who designed the Monadnock Building. William LeBaron Jenney, who designed the Second Lighter Building, the former Sears store. William Hollibird and Martin Roche, designers of the Marquette Building. And Schmidt, Garden, and Martin, who designed Ward's Warehouse on the river. One of Sullivan's early residential commissions was for the Charnley House on Astor Street. Sullivan was the architect of record. The restrained, mature design is considered to be the work of his assistant at the time, Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright was Sullivan's best-known protege. While working for Sullivan, he designed and built this house for himself in Oak Park in 1889. During the next 20 years, until he built Roby House, Frank Lloyd Wright designed more than 50 buildings in the Chicago area. Wright left Sullivan's employ in 1893, and the same year saw completed his design for the Winslow House in the western suburb of River Forest. Understandably, the Winslow House reveals a certain influence of Sullivan, especially in the door and in the decorative frieze. Designed the same year was this house for Chaud River Forest. The steep roof, large dormers, and Romanesque doorway show Wright was still searching for a style. In 1901, Wright began a series of houses often called his prairie houses. One of the first important ones, and one of the finest, was the Ward Willits house in the northern suburb of Highland Park. The Willits house is built near the shore of Lake Michigan and is cruciform in plan. The facade reveals echoes of the Ho-O-Den, the Japanese building at the Columbian Exposition, where Wright was helping with Sullivan's transportation building. The skylight design of Willits repeats the cruciform plan of the building. One of the finest of Wright's Oak Park houses was built near his own home. The Arthur Hertley house is faced with alternating courses of red-brown Roman brick. A favorite Wright detail, the Romanesque entrance arch feature of the asymmetric facade. Wright's first major use of poured concrete was in Unity Church in Oak Park. This four-square building, completed in 1906, is both temple and fortress. The lower building is the parish house. Exterior ornament is limited to the decoration of the central. The interior is a cube, with the pulpit set within it, and the low balconies keep the congregation close to the speaker. One of the most unusual of Wright's Oak Park houses is that built for Thomas Gale on Elizabeth Court. With its bold cantilevers and interlocking forms, it is often considered a forerunner to Fallingwater, built 30 years later. Wright saw two fine residences completed in 1908. One was in River Forest for his secretary, Isabel Roberts. A small house with broad overhangs and a two-story living room. The other was a favorite of Wright's, the Avery Coonley House in Riverside. The Coonley House is an excellent example of Wright's Prairie House series, with a skilled and imaginative interweaving of spaces. And restrained but rich decoration, especially in the windows. The interior is one of the more striking of all Wright's prairie houses. In addition to the main house, there are two other buildings on the Coonley estate, and stables shown here, and the gardener's cottage. All are now private residences. A few years later, Wright designed a playhouse for the Coonley's daughter, a long block away from the main house. With its pergola casting shadows, the playhouse is one of the most abstract of Wright's early designs. The finest of all Wright's early houses is Roby House, completed in 1909, outside. Wright felt a close affinity to the prairie, and this is reflected in the long, low lines of Roby House. Enormous cantilevers at each end establish the emphasis on the horizontal, which is further underlined by the long band of French doors and the long Roman bricks. Some of Wright's finest glass is found in Roby House. In the interior, the splendid oak woodwork and the Wright-designed furniture have been completely renovated. At the center of the house is the hearth, the heart of any home, according to Wright. Wright's Oak Park studio was a training ground for his able assistants, some of whom became the nucleus of the Prairie School of Architecture, often characterized by buildings of low rectangular shape with minimal ornament. Walter Burley Griffin worked for Frank Lloyd Wright for 4 years and became Wright's office manager in his Oak Park studio. One of Griffin's first commissions was for the Emery House in Elmhurst, Commando 3. Banded windows and a stucco exterior with wood trim were often used by Prairie School architects. The corner pier was a Griffin trademark, and the angled roofs show a Japanese influence. In the Frederick Carter House in Evanston, Griffin returned to some of his early ideas. Again we see corner piers of brick, a cantilevered second story, and angled roof overhangs. In 1912, Griffin completed a pair of houses in Evanston for Hurd Comstock. This is house number 2, incorporating corner piers and broad gables. In 1911, Griffin married Marian Mahoney, an architect with whom he had worked in Wright's studio. This is her elegant rendering of Griffin's Comstock houses. And this is her drawing of a Griffin house in Kenilworth called Solid Rock. In 1912, Griffin won the competition for the design of Canberra, the capital city of Australia. He left for Australia in 1914, and thereafter made his home there. The lake in the foreground he named in his honor. William Drummond worked off and on for Frank Lloyd Wright for 10 years and left Wright's studio in 1909. His specialty was making working drawings from Wright's sketches. Drummond built his own house in River Forest in 1910. It is square and compact, with an exterior of wood and stucco featuring decorative wood trim. Part of the second story is cantilevered. Across the street from his own house, Drummond designed this house for A.W. Muther in 1910. The Chicago windows have fixed center panes and side casements. A third house by Drummond in 1910 was built for Mrs. Avery Coonley in Riverside. Called Thorncroft, it is an excellent example of prairie school architecture. The once open porch has been glassed in. In 1912, Drummond began a partnership with Louis Gunzel. Together they built the River Forest Women's Club, designed by Drummond. The clubhouse is sheathed in the boards and battens that were a trademark of the partnership. The upper windows bring light to the auditorium. George Washington Maher was born in Virginia and came to Chicago as a youth. He worked in the office of J.L. Silsby with young Frank Lloyd Wright, but did not work for Wright in Oak Park. In his first house, which Maher built for himself in Kenilworth, too many architectural novelties create a feeling of disunity. Maher next designed the John Farson House in Oak Park, now housing the Oak Park River Forest Senior Citizen Center. The facade is strongly symmetrical, leavened somewhat by the curved porch to the south, with its arcaded windows and ornamental mullions. Maher's Taylor House in Oak Park is now the Unity Building. The same symmetry found in the Farson House facade occurs here as well. At the south end of the Taylor House is a handsome curved bay with elaborate fascias. Maher's Corbin House in Kenilworth is a three-story structure embodying elements from European sources. The ornamented windows are generally in groups of three. On Chicago's south side is the Magerstadt House, a handsome building by Maher, faced in light brown Roman brick. The impressive entrance, with its stone surround and Baroque capitals, is on the north side of the house. The door is especially well detailed. Certain design elements recall Wright's Heller House a few blocks away. Chicago, more than any other city, is fortunate in having had architects of such manifest power to prepare the foundation for the splendid buildings which grace the skyline today. Richardson helped prepare the ground for Sullivan, and the names of Louis Henry Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright are held in honor throughout the world.